Hello, guys and gals, me, Mutahar, and ladies and gentlemen, that Epstein story, it ain't actually dying. So for anybody that hasn't been following, if you've been living under a rock, there's been a war with Iran for the last few days, but even despite there being the threat of massive war spilling out in parts of the world it's just, that's a reality now. People are still not forgetting that there's a bunch of files out there that is implicating and is casting some serious suspicions on some of the most powerful people in the world for being attributed to one of the largest human traffickers on the planet. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to give you an idea, today I was actually looking through, and it's interesting to say that as we're speaking right now, 48,000 files from the Epstein database have actually apparently been removed. Some of them even alleging malfeasance with the current president of the United States. Now, I decided I wanted to look into the story because there's actually a lot to discuss here. There's been some crazy depositions. You've got Bill and Hillary Clinton both yapping now in front of the actual government. Yes, we have depositions of both Bill and Hillary. So it's been a wild, wild set of days indeed. So I want to just kind of go through all of this, kind of pick apart a lot of the fluff, and really bring you the meat of the situation. So out of the 48,000 files that have actually been removed, and a lot of people can verify this for themselves by going to the Department of Justice's website, the Epstein files, and actually reading these for themselves, right? So for instance, there's a way for you to actually browse the entire files for yourself. You can put in anything you want here, hit that big old search button, or you can go to the DOJ disclosures and you can actually see all of the data sets that have been released, which there are about 12 of. Now, a lot of people have been looking at these data sets, for instance, and have noticed that the actual numbering pattern around them, which would be EFTA, like for example 012, 62782, and then of course you've got EFTA 012, 62784. You might be wondering and sitting there, it's like, wait, if it's released, numbered sequentially, shouldn't we be able to see the number 3, right? Shouldn't there be a 012, 62783? That's a good question, actually. And in some cases, you can actually open up some of these files, for instance, and see that that is actually bundled with other files. So it's not exactly easy, but for a lot of individuals out there, there have actually been groups like NPR that have actually been investigating and have said that the Justice Department has withheld and removed some files related to Trump, right? And that was, again, an insane claim to be making. So, of course, how did NPR do this? They did it the exact same way that I kind of talked about, too. They reviewed multiple sets of unique serial numbers appearing before and after the pages in question, stamped into documents in the file database, FBI case records, emails, and discovery documents. And, of course, the NPR investigation then found that dozens of pages that appear to be cataloged by the Justice Department actually aren't shared publicly as they're legally required. So wild, wild stuff. And of course, obviously, there have been actual committee members in the government, like Robert Garcia, who's like, wait a minute, I reviewed unredacted evidence logs at the DOJ, and I can confirm that the DOJ appears to have illegally withheld FBI interviews with survivors who accuse Trump of heinous crimes. So again, people don't know whether there's a cover-up actually happening. To be real with you, I'm not a naive person. I think there's definitely a cover-up, and it's definitely not just to assist the President of the United States. I think it's to assist the whole class of billionaires and super powerful people that have been implicated in these crazy files. Now, the reason why 48,000 files were suddenly removed all of a sudden was not because that there's a war taking place and the government thinks that maybe people are completely distracted, right? Whether it's aliens or a fucking war, maybe as long as people aren't talking about these files, maybe it's a net win. Now, the government has removed these because apparently they've done such a terrible job with redacting personally identifiable information for victims that a lot of lawyers have come flag certain files. Per what the government says, they've removed these files so that the lawyers can re-review them and make sure that further redactions can be placed so that, these people can't be re-victimized. But here's the thing, right? No matter what the government does or says, thankfully, there are ways for us to independently verify. For instance, jmail.world has done such a great job at archiving this that they really do deserve a fucking ultra medal. They've done so many jobs at this that they've even categorized every every single type of mail into like individual topics, right? Things like key properties, travel destinations, intelligence and state connections. And this is important for everyone because I think there's so much information that we need to be able to absolutely sort of parse it in a very easy to read way. There's been a lot of shit in these emails that don't even relate specifically to the human trafficking. Some of them relate to his connections, Jeffrey's in particular, with state leaders, people, who are, former prime ministers to countries like Israel, his connections to allegedly some of the most, insane foreign intelligence communities. This is a guy that's so fucking well connected at such a high level that it almost feels like everything ties back to him when you look at the richest individuals around the world, right? Crazy shit. But you can remove every single file from this. Thankfully, the communities of the world, thankfully the open source community has basically kept all of these files available and archived. So if the government really just wants to remove stuff, they can remove it from their own sites. That's fine. You can't remove it from the citizen sites, unless you go down a whole different rabbit hole there. But thankfully, there have been some good things that have come out of the Epstein files in that even if the United States seems like it's incredibly compromised when it comes to delivering justice, like they want to just make this go under the rug, there have been a lot of arrests and resignations around the world too, particularly in Europe, right? We talked about, Prince Andrew. We also need to talk about Peter Mandelson, who was the former British ambassador. Both of these guys actually arrested. And even if they were released the day of, the actual investigations are still commencing on these people, right? Just the arrest is already a slap to these people's dignity and respect that they covet so much, but the investigation is a good thing to see. There's individuals that have resigned from various posts because they've been connected to Epstein, and because people have been rightfully calling for why that has happened, they've resigned in grace. Some of these people have been apologizing for it alongside resigning, so it's a good thing to see that in some parts of the world, there is actually some level of justice being done. Even when it comes to some of the richest guys in the world who dictate what we get to do day in and day out and decide policy, people like Bill Gates, for instance, actually finally had to say that they regret their involvement with it. They've even said things like, I did nothing illicit, I saw nothing illicit. He acknowledged that he had 2 affairs with women that Epstein later discovered, but said that they didn't involve his victims, which kind of a convenient thing to say. To be clear, I've never spent any time with victims, the women around him, he said. It was a huge mistake to spend time with them, and I apologize to other people who are drawn into this because of the mistake that I made. Now, do you believe Bill Gates at his word here? I personally don't, but it's insane to think that this wouldn't even been happening if these files had never been released to begin with. Remember, the fact that these files released is what has put so much pressure on some of the richest, most powerful individuals in the world, right? To the point where they actually have to acknowledge and talk about this. Now, it's crazy to think that this situation has been, again, so politicized that you've got statements from people like Chuck Schumer saying stuff like this. This is insane. This wouldn't have happened probably like 10 years ago, but listen to shit like this.
Let me be blunt. There's a massive cover-up going on in the Justice Department to protect Donald Trump and people associated with Jeffrey Epstein. As we expected, Trump, Bondi, and their minions have played games with the release of these files. They release some documents that they want to release and continue to hide others.
Now, I don't necessarily disagree with it, but bro, you have a lot of power in the government. Now, again, a lot of these people have kind of come together from party lines. I think for a lot of these individuals, for a lot of these politicians making bold claims like that, it's like, listen, you've seen what the unredacted files are, and it's kind of insane to me that nothing has actually leaked from any of these politicians, and none of these people have actually, brought up, none of these people, if there is any actual credible evidence to go on, either shit or get off the pot, either actually bring it up, make it so that it's so publicly known that eventually, no matter how compromised the Justice Department is, they have to actually pursue with some form of an investigation, right? If there is actually something in here that exists that could actually bring down, and again, it doesn't have to just be any president. I don't really care what side of the aisle this is hitting, right? I have no desire to see Trump go down or if he's innocent, then good, he's innocent. But if he's guilty, he's guilty. And the same thing goes for people like Bill Clinton, for instance. Now, speaking of the Clintons, they've actually been interestingly, resistant to being questioned the whole time. So back in August 2025, they were actually, subpoenaed for the Epstein files, right? Both, the Clintons were brought in. And of course, at the time, both Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton didn't actually want to jump through with it, right? Because after they were asked in August of 2025, for months, they were actually defying these lawful subpoenas to the point when a lot of these, Democrats and Republicans were like, hold on, wait, we should have a vote to hold these people in contempt if they're not going to come and fail to appear. Because the Clintons thought that they didn't have to. They thought that none of these were actually enforceable at the time. So obviously when there was a official contempt being threatened, then they decided, you know what, we're just going to show up and agree. Okay, we're just going to actually show up. We're going to come up. We're going to discuss everything. So no matter what people like Bill Clinton say, where they're like, release all the files and I'm going to be very compliant, they have shown a history of not complying to any of this stuff until, of course, they were absolutely forced to. Like, teeth were literally being pulled at this point. Now, of course, a lot of these were actually happening behind closed doors, which ultimately is of no importance to me. I want to actually see stuff that's released publicly. And thankfully, in this case, there have been public depositions. So we're going to go through what the actual Clintons have said and just kind of go through the big key highlights as we go through this video.
Said that you've never been to Mr. Epstein's island. Is that correct?
You know
You've
what?
never been.
I am so tired of answering that question. If you have one scintilla of evidence to the contrary, put it forward. I have never been on his island, period. I've never been in his homes, his offices, his anything. So I don't know how many times you have to say the same thing over and over and over again. And I just am struggling with the relevance of all of this. But no, I never have been.
So that's a pretty roundabout way of just saying, no, never been there. Now, again, the interesting thing about this is you can just tell from here that she never wanted to be here. For months, she was fighting to not come here. And when they ask her this question, she's like, listen, I'm fucking done. Mind you, this is also 4.5 hours of a deposition as well, too. So I can understand just being that frustrated. But at the same time, bro, when they ask you that question, it's like a yes or no question. You just have to say, no, I wasn't there. Simple as that, okay? And again, if you didn't lie about that, if you're not lying under oath, there's no shame in that. So, of course, then comes Billy Clinton talking about his relationship with being more business-like. So listen to this.
Programs around the world.
Mr. President, were you ever in the position to owe Jeffrey Epstein a favor?
I didn't consider that. I thought we had an understanding about the airplanes, that he would let me use the airplane to set up my AIDS programs around the world if I'd agreed to talk to him for an hour about economics and politics on every long leg. I kept my word, and
You're telling me that the guy that you... You're telling me the guy you wrote like a little birthday note to and everything, obviously he was a little bit he was closer to the Epstein than I think most other people in it, right? There was sending a guy an email, and then there's being on the plane, right? So his argument is I was just on the plane. I didn't think that I had to owe a favor. I just figured he'd let me just bum on his plane, and all I have to do was talk about politics or economics for a fucking hour. You honestly expect anybody to just sit there and believe that there wasn't some sort of favors beyond all of that you felt like you owed? There wasn't something just being that tangentially connected, that being that, being that friendly, so to speak, right? That you didn't that there wasn't something behind the scenes that you would have had to offer. Again, a lot of this requires you to take these individuals at their word, and it's difficult to do that when you just know that these people are not trustworthy storytellers whatsoever, right? They're just trying to save their own skin in this situation. But again, given the fact that when we looked at people like Prince Andrew, who was, basically arrested on the idea of, giving classified information, it always makes me wonder, maybe that's what Epstein was trying to do, maybe seek out more information. The guy was really good at seeking out information and sort of compiling it for his benefit in the market and beyond just the whole human trafficking angle of his life.
When you saw photos of your husband in a hot tub laying on a beach and getting massaged by other women, and you knew that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in some of these trips and these things, did it concern you at all?
I'm here not to offer my opinions. I'm here to answer specific questions to the best of my ability.
When you saw your husband in these photos with a young woman being massaged, what went through your mind?
I am not going to speculate.
I mean, she's clearly, I mean, listen, this is a woman that stuck by a guy after he, like, what, defiled their marriage in office. So, she's asking her this logical question. It's like, what's going through your mind is, your husband is with these younger women getting massaged. And I don't really think that there's much speculation. I think the actual relationship and the dynamic, understanding how the person feels emotionally in the situation is quite important. But you can see that she's obviously dodging the question. And of course, obviously the person answering the question, which is Nancy Mace, is getting a rise out of her too. Now, the next bit of story involves an individual known as Howard Lutnick, who is involved in a couple of business dealings specifically related to, I understand, a limited liability company with Epstein. And while he's not actually charged with any sort of criminal wrongdoing, he's sort of brought into the story because of, again, him being involved in business relationships, which obviously anybody connected to this guy, especially at that level, needs to be investigated, and people need to understand the nature of the connection over here. Now, Hillary Clinton was asked about this, and she had an interesting response, so I kind of want to play that.
I know Howard Lutnick because when I was senator on 9/11, the firm he headed, Cantor Fitzgerald, suffered the greatest loss of life. As I recall, something like 650 of his employees were murdered by terrorists that day. Howard Lutnick missed being a victim because he was delayed dropping his child off to kindergarten. You asked the question. I'm going to answer your question.
Now you're going to yell
This
at
was
me?
what I spent
You're
my
going to yell at
time
me.
doing.
I'm a
I
survivor
spent
trying to look out for other survivors, trying to
and
get to the
I
bottom
was
of it.
taking care
You
of
waited
the
6
people
months
who
to
lost
get here today.
3,000
6 months,
lives
and now you're being
at World
defiant
Trade
and
Center.
indignant today.
Again, may I remind you, it could have just been a simple yes, no. Maybe I met the guy in DC once, but she decided to bring up the whole 9/11 bit as some sort of way to like exalt or like, bring her character up, when in reality it had almost nothing to do with the question that was basically being asked here.
Me think he was involved.
To get more information for this investigation, was wondering if you also agree that President Trump should answer questions of this committee.
That's for you to decide, but he did know him well, and I once had a brief discussion with him about it. The president never, this is 20-something years ago, never said anything to me to make me think he was involved in anything improper with regard to Epstein either. He just didn't. He just said we were friends, and then we had a falling out over a land deal, property deal.
Now, again, this is a clip that I wanted to play because Bill Clinton basically says and exonerates from his understanding, obviously, that nothing untoward was happening with Trump and Epstein and, unfortunately, any minor. And the thing about it is, obviously, that's all I think he can say because maybe he genuinely didn't see anything happening over there. But there's also a darker way to look at this and think that maybe behind closed doors, both Trump and Clinton probably agreed to what they should say and get their facts straight and the story straight. There's a lot of ways to take this, but obviously these are older individuals, I guess. And to me, I think that there's a level of protecting each other here. But, for, again, full transparency's sake and full context, obviously this is him exonerating, or at least to his knowledge, right? Because he hasn't seen anything with his own eyes. To basically say that, Trump is not necessarily involved in the dirtiest of the dirty. But again, it's up to you to take this. It's up to you if you want to trust Bill Clinton at his word over here. But again, I wanted to play this clip for, again, the full context. Then, of course, down the road, she was asked about things like Pizzagate, for instance, which for anybody that doesn't know Pizzagate, this is Comet Ping Pong, which is actual chain, it's a pizza store where, again, it was tied because of the leaked emails from John Podesta, somebody who was attributed to Hillary Clinton. And in these emails, people were fishing through them, and basically they saw code words they thought that were related to a human trafficking, child trafficking ring. Now again, whether this was legitimate or not is something that people have said has been very disproven. And of course, there were other things at the time too, like Frazzle Drip, for instance, which I remember when I was doing Deep Web every Sunday, there was people were like, did you find the Hillary Clinton video on the dark web? And even on the dark web, this is why I never took this stuff super seriously, because as somebody that browsed the dark web pretty actively at that time, you know, I wasn't looking for anything illegal, but obviously if things like Frazzle Drip existed, you probably would have found it on like a link list. You probably would have found it just under a general discussion on one of the big image boards or, the Reddit-like threads on the internet. The fact that nobody was taking it seriously even on the dark web and no videos or images ever really surfaced from that, other than like fake stuff that would show up on like Twitter here and there or Reddit or like a conspiracy board on Reddit, this was something that obviously I at the time didn't take seriously, and many people who even were into conspiracy theories, but were actually logically applying their brain cells, weren't necessarily taking this seriously. But the thing about it is, I can actually understand the frustration from individuals like Hillary Clinton, where she talks about, I can't believe you're even referencing it. The things about it is that the connections that Pizzagate has to this is when we're looking at things like the mentions of jerky and recipes related to that, where people thought that code words in the Epstein documents were related. They were talking about something sinister just in plain English. And the thing about it is, there's a lot of stuff that you can go after. Like, let me bring up the reality here, right? Like, QAnon is a conspiracy theory that people grabbed into. But, in a way, QAnon is kind of it kind of vindicated itself through the Epstein files, because in this case, we actually do have a real human trafficking proven network, right, with actual billionaires and people's right. There's actual real victims that we can 100% verify. And the thing about it is that you can reach down the conspiracy angles of, baby eating, cannibalism, crazy shit like that, or you can look at the actual facts, which are dark and decrepit on their own. And we can focus on that and bring the people attributed to that to justice rather than chasing, in some cases, what are actually phantoms. Now, look, there's a lot more to kind of discuss over here, but I feel like this video has gotten longer than it has, than it really needed to be. So ultimately, the end, there is one more investigation that I do want to talk about, something that did open up. For instance, anybody that doesn't know what this coordinates lead to, this is the infamous Zorro Ranch, which is a property that was of great importance to Epstein. And this property, if you zoom out over here, ladies and gentlemen, is in the state of New Mexico. It's actually a fair bit out from places like Santa Fe, from places like Stanley, but of course, this little ranch was where a lot of evil has allegedly occurred. And of course, when you look at the actual photos from this area, which have recently come out by the DOJ, you can see that the interior is just genuinely a mindfuck. Like, just look at the actual design over here too, the chandeliers, the weird, like, colored chairs. Then, of course, the further you go down, I think one of the weirder images that I saw was this, like, pool where it almost looked like a liminal horror room for a minute. There was something that guys like Aiden Ross actually said that really stuck with me, where some of these rooms are designed in such a way that if you're like a victim and you happen to escape and reach law enforcement, then the rooms are designed in such a way where describing them makes you almost sound crazy, right? Like pastel pink walls, liminal white cream like design. People will have a hard time describing what the actual locations were looking like. Like, if you remember the images with the dentist chair, for instance, like if you actually escaped, went to law enforcement, and you tried describing the rooms that you were in, you'd almost sound like a crazy individual. And somehow I feel like that actually had some weight to it. Like, Aiden Ross actually did say something that actually really mattered, and maybe that's also one of the craziest parts about the story. Now, obviously, the really filthy part about this whole story, too, is like the feds at one point were actually asking, allegedly, New Mexico to halt the Epstein probe into Zorro Ranch, right? Which, again, for a lot of individuals, a lot of victims, was a serious, serious blow. And thankfully for them, at least in this case, they decided that because of the unsealed FBI files, there is actually a warranted case for a further examination. So now that that case has apparently been reopened, New Mexico is going to be looking in to what has actually happened with Zorro Ranch. But it makes you wonder, right? It's like, why did the FBI even intervene to begin with? And, why did that intervention even succeed, right? Like, if there's actual malfeasance to happen, the U.S. government, no matter what level, should pursue justice. The U.S. cannot claim to be a justice-loving country when this kind of shit is happening so blatantly. And of course, even in other cases, guys like Leon Black are actually being sued. For anybody that doesn't know, Leon Black, we talked about very briefly when he was connected through a big discussion towards LifeTouch, which was a company that dealt with taking photos, school photos of children. Now, of course, Leon Black was somebody that was associated through an investment firm, and that investment firm has also decided to come out and say that, again, we didn't know anything about that connection that Leon Black had. The facts matter. From an Apollo perspective, there's nothing new in these documents. Neither Mark Rowan nor anyone else, excluding Leon Black, had either a business or personal relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Mr. Black, who left the firm in 2021, previously retained and compensated Mr. Epstein for personal tax advice. In select instances, Mr. Rowan and other Apollo employees provided information to Epstein in connection with his tax work. So again, Apollo will go and say, no, we didn't know anything about this. And again, whether you trust the company here or not is entirely up to you. But it's just another example of high-profile exits and actual consequences happening because of these files. You know, for as messy of a release as this is, I don't want to make these videos just focusing on the negative. I think there is a good positive amount when you do get to talk about people, actually resigning, people apologizing, people being arrested, and investigations that were once shut down finally being reopened. I think it's important that we keep discussing these files because I think they affect everyone. I think, if we ever are okay with a human trafficking network getting away like this, then I don't think any other claim of justice is ever really valid. So in regards to everything that's been happening around the world, whether aliens are being disclosed or war in Iran is being used as a distraction in some ways from these files, keep talking about it, keep sharing it, and keep holding your government accountable. Because these files don't just affect America. This was happening at an international scale. Every big country is involved in this. And really, the most power any country can have to deal with justice here is the United States. And it's just, the only painful part about this is that's the only country not doing enough to seek justice. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and I'm out.